My mother died the winter I turned 16. I remember the way the hospital room smelled sterile, quiet, too clean for someone like her. Cancer took her in pieces slowly at first, then all at once. My dad and I barely spoke during the final days, not because we didn't care, but because words felt like clutter in a space filled with grief. We held each other instead, two people clinging to the only thing they had left. After the funeral, we came home to a house that didn't know how to breathe without her. Her perfume still lingered in the hallway outside the master bedroom. There was a small lavender bottle on her vanity that neither of us dared to move. The Sunday pancakes she used to make became my dad's ritual. Not perfect like hers, but close enough. Every week the smell filled the kitchen like clockwork. We watched the black and white movies she loved, even if we both pretended we weren't crying during the same parts she used to quote aloud. The years moved forward, but we didn't. We built a kind of life from what remained quiet routine sacred. My friends said it was weird that we hadn't changed the curtains in the living room or that we still used the same chipped mugs she'd bought at a flea market. I didn't care. It was like each object held part of her. If we replaced too much, we might lose her completely. Dad didn't date, at least not that I knew of. He poured himself into work, kept to himself, and on weekends we became our own little island. We didn't say her name often, but she was everywhere in the recipe cards taped to the fridge in the garden she planted every spring in the glow-in-the-dark stars she'd helped me stick on the ceiling of my bedroom when I was 10. I still slept under them even though some had lost their glow and one or two peeled slightly at the corners. I couldn't bring myself to take them down. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was ours. And in some strange way it felt enough. Until one evening just before Christmas, when Dad came home with a woman in a red coat and introduced her as someone special. Her name was Delilah. Dad met Delilah at his firm's holiday party. That's how he introduced her to me, standing just inside the doorway, cheeks flushed from the cold, her red wool coat still buttoned to the collar. Her smile was wide and practiced, and her perfume was sharp and unfamiliar, slicing through the air like it was claiming space. She shook my hand with both of hers and said she'd heard so much about me. I smiled back, polite, unsure. It had been years since I'd seen Dad look so energized. His shoulders sat differently straighter, like he'd just remembered how to carry joy. At first I tried to be open. I figured maybe he was due some light after all those dark years. We'd had our time to mourn, hadn't we? So I made an effort, joined them for dinner, asked her questions, even helped her carry groceries from her car one Saturday morning. But something always felt slightly off, like she was measuring the space between us, deciding what she could shift, what she could erase. Within 3 months, Delilah had practically moved in. Her slippers sat by the front door where Mom's used to be. A new throw blanket, beige and stiff, was folded neatly over the arm of the couch that still smelled faintly of rosemary and lavender. The pantry had gluten-free everything, though no one had asked for it. One afternoon I came home and found her standing in the living room with a box in her hands. She was smiling, but her eyes were focused. I followed her gaze to the mantel above the fireplace. My mother's photo, one taken in the spring before she got sick, wearing a yellow sundress and holding a mug of tea, was gone. In its place was a ceramic sculpture of some modern abstract shape, cold and expressionless. I asked where the photo went. Delilah said she'd packed it away, that she was helping the house breathe. I didn't say anything, just nodded once and went upstairs. I found the photo later in a storage bin in the hall closet wedged between old phone chargers and a bag of winter scarves. I took it back to my room. Dad didn't mention it. Not then. He seemed caught between wanting peace and pretending nothing was changing. And maybe I would have kept pretending too if it hadn't been for what happened the morning she brought out the paint swatches. It was a Saturday morning and I was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone when Delilah walked in carrying a bundle under her arm. She dropped it on the table like it was a stack of blueprints, paint samples, fabric swatches, glossy pages torn from a home magazine. She spread them out with care like they were battle plans. "We're redecorating," she said, her voice light, too light. "Fresh start." I looked up, unsure if she meant the entire house or just a room or two. She pointed at one swatch, a pale gray, and said it would go well in the living room. Then another, something navy and cold for the dining area. She was already talking about new curtains, rugs, art. Her hand skimmed over the table where my mom used to knead dough for Sunday rolls, now marked for minimalist polish. I asked if she planned to change everything. Her smile didn't move. "It's time to let go of the past," she said, her voice a shade cooler. "A new beginning means new energy. The house needs to reflect the future, not a memory." I stayed quiet for a moment, then said some of Mom's things were still in the master bedroom. Maybe we could leave parts of the house untouched. Delilah's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped. "Ezra," she said, "your mother has been gone a long time. This isn't healthy. It's time." Then she said something I didn't expect. "You're old enough now. You might be happier finding your own place. This house should be for your dad and me, for our life together." I looked up just as Dad walked into the room. He'd heard everything but didn't say a word at first, just stood there looking between us like we were two pieces of furniture he didn't want to move. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Delilah has a point," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time to start fresh. There's an apartment complex closer to your job, isn't there?" He didn't look at me when he said it, just kept his eyes on the floor like if he didn't meet mine, he wouldn't have to see what it did to me. That night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The stars Mom and I had stuck up there still glowed faintly in the dark. I didn't cry. I just counted them one by one until I reached the edge of sleep and decided what I'd do next. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. There was nothing left to explain. Over the next week, I packed in silence. I waited until Delilah was out running errands or at her evening yoga classes, and I moved quietly through the house box by box. I didn't take much, just clothes, a few books, and the framed photo of Mom that I'd rescued from the closet. A scarf of hers that still smelled faintly like jasmine. Her recipe cards. A couple of the old movies we used to watch on Sundays. I found a furnished studio on the other side of town. Small, clean enough. I signed the lease without telling Dad. Transferred my portion of the family phone plan. Changed my emergency contacts at work. It all felt strangely methodical, like I was dismantling a version of myself I no longer recognized. The night before I left, I stood in the kitchen longer than I meant to. The counter where Mom used to roll dough was bare, now a sterile white. The walls had already been repainted a soft gray. Her presence had been scraped away slowly over the months, and I hadn't noticed how complete it had become until that moment. When the sun began to rise the next morning, I loaded the last of my things into the back of my car, 3 boxes and a single suitcase. Delilah was out at her Pilates class. Dad was already at work. The house was quiet, like it had been waiting for this. I placed my key on the kitchen counter next to a folded piece of paper. No anger, no emotion, just a sentence. Taking your advice, starting over, forgetting the past. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. By the time they realized I was gone, I'd already blocked their numbers. I ignored every call, every message. When Dad showed up at my job later that week, I had security escort him out. I shut it all down. Social media, email, everything. If they wanted me erased, I could give them that. The first nights alone in the studio were the hardest. No familiar smells, no pancakes, no ghosts, just the hum of the fridge and the sound of traffic through thin walls. But something in the quiet steadied me. And just when I thought I might finally fade into that silence, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in years. It had been 3 months since I walked away. 3 months of quiet mornings, freelance work, and slowly building a life that didn't include the people who used to be my world. I kept my head down, said little, and kept moving. Some days were heavier than others, but the silence had become manageable. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something told me not to. "Ezra," the voice said, tentative. "It's Rowena, your mom's sister." I hadn't heard from Aunt Rowena in years. She'd moved to Oregon when I was still in high school. The distance, both emotional and physical, had widened after Mom died, but now she sounded urgent. She said she'd been trying to reach me for weeks. Apparently, I was supposed to inherit a trust fund from my maternal grandparents on my 25th birthday. It had been arranged quietly through lawyers. The problem was, they'd been trying to contact me through Dad, and he hadn't passed along a single message. She paused, then added, "There's something else." That something else turned out to be a property, a small brick building downtown. Nothing flashy, just 2 floors, a coffee shop on the ground level, an apartment above. Mom had bought it years ago before she got sick. I'd never even known it existed. After she passed, Dad had taken over management. He'd been collecting rent ever since. Rowena told me I'd never received a cent of it, and the current lease was about to expire. "They're trying to sell it," she said. "Delilah's name is all over the paperwork." I hung up and stared at the ceiling of my studio. I hadn't cried when I left home, not when Dad told me to move out, not when I spent my first night alone, but hearing how they'd buried my mother's legacy under their own lives that did it. I hired a lawyer the next day, a good one. We pulled every document, every bank transfer, every detail we could find. What we uncovered wasn't just neglect, it was theft. The rent from the cafe had been going into a joint account between Dad and Delilah. They'd been spending it, using it. But I didn't want a long, bitter court battle. I wanted something else, something immediate, precise. I had my lawyer draft a letter. It laid out every violation, every legal breach, every dollar they owed. But it ended with an offer. They could sign over the building and all back rent plus interest within 7 days. In exchange, I'd agree to do exactly what they'd told me months ago, start over, forget the past. We had it hand-delivered by a process server to their front door on a Tuesday morning. I knew Delilah would be home. She posted about her Pilates schedule like clockwork, and I was counting on her reading it first. The letter was delivered at 9:17 a.m. sharp. My lawyer timed it down to the minute. Delilah's Pilates class let out at 9:30, and we knew she'd check the mail before heading back inside. I pictured her standing at the door in her leggings and fleece vest, flipping through envelopes before landing on the heavy white one with her name printed in bold. By 10:04, she was online. Her Facebook post was long, vaguely philosophical and dripping with self-pity. She wrote about ungrateful children and how difficult it was to blend families when some people can't let go of grief. She didn't mention me by name, but anyone who knew us wouldn't have to guess. Comments rolled in fast. Some friends offered sympathy. A few neighbors chimed in with generic encouragement. But there were other voices, too. Quiet, but pointed. Someone from Dad's office wrote, "Honoring the past isn't the same as living in it, but erasing it doesn't make a future." Another added, "Grief isn't linear, and legacy deserves respect." And then a comment from one of Mom's old friends, direct cutting, "Some things shouldn't be painted over." That night I found myself lying awake staring at the ceiling in my apartment. Not the ceiling from my old room with the fading glow-in-the-dark stars, but blank drywall. I tried not to think about her voice, her laugh. But memories crept in anyway. The way she used to trace her finger along the rim of a coffee mug when she was thinking. The way she'd tie her hair up in a scarf on cleaning days and dance barefoot around the living room. I hadn't just lost her. They'd buried what remained of her without even asking me. 2 days after the letter was delivered, Dad tried to get in touch. He couldn't call, his number was still blocked, but he found a way. A co-worker of mine texted me, said he'd approached her in a coffee shop near the office. He looked tired, she said he just wanted to talk, that I was blowing everything out of proportion, that I was hurting his marriage, that I was acting like a stranger. She told him word for word what I'd asked her to say if this ever happened. Some people think starting over means everyone else should forget the past while they get to keep the benefits. Then she stood up and walked away. Friday came and went with no response from their lawyer, but I knew them well enough to know they wouldn't stay quiet forever. By Saturday morning, the storm finally cracked. The deadline was Monday at midnight. We gave them 7 full days. For the first 6, they said nothing through the proper channels. They ranted, panicked, cornered people I knew, and tried every back door they could find. But the official response, silence. Then, at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the clock ran out, my lawyer received the documents. Signed, scanned, submitted. The building was mine. The back rent every cent. No negotiation, no conditions. Just a quiet signature delivered in the final moments, proof they knew exactly what they'd done and exactly what they were about to lose. The next morning I drove to the property for the first time since I'd learned it existed. The paint on the cafe's exterior was chipped. The windows needed a good cleaning. But the structure was solid, and the door still creaked open with a familiarity I hadn't earned yet. Frank looked up from behind the counter when I stepped inside. His expression shifted from suspicion to surprise the moment he recognized me. "You're Clara's boy," he said, drying his hands on a towel. "Used to come in here with her when you were little." I nodded. "It's mine now." His face fell for a second, just enough for me to see the worry behind his eyes. "They said they were going to sell." I figured new owners would raise the rent. "I've been here 15 years. I don't think I could afford." "You're not going anywhere," I said. "I'm cutting the rent in half. You stay as long as you want." Frank blinked, then smiled. It was a small smile, but real. He stepped out from behind the counter and shook my hand with both of his, holding it like it meant something more than just agreement. "This place meant a lot to her," he said. "Still does to a lot of us." I looked around at the worn chairs, the soft light, the little handwritten signs. It wasn't just a building. It was memory that had refused to disappear, no matter how long they tried to ignore it. I told Frank I'd be back the next day to talk repairs and ideas. He offered me coffee, and I took it to go. That afternoon, my lawyer sent one final letter. The final letter was brief but intentional. My lawyer delivered it by hand. It thanked them formally, politely, for teaching me the value of starting over and forgetting the past. I wrote that I'd taken their words to heart, that I was moving forward just like they had once encouraged, that I understood now what it meant to let go completely. And because I knew they cared deeply about appearances, I made sure others received copies too. A few of Dad's colleagues, some mutual friends, people who'd watched from the sidelines wondering what had really happened. I wanted the full story to exist somewhere outside their version of it. 2 weeks later, Delilah filed for divorce. Irreconcilable differences, a phrase that felt more accurate than she probably intended. From what I heard, the financial strain broke something between them. Maybe the truth did too. Dad reached out to Aunt Rowena not long after. She called to let me know he'd asked if I might consider meeting for coffee, said he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I told her to be kind to him. I didn't ask for the message to be passed back, but I gave her something to say if it came up again. Tell him I'm just following his wife's advice. I didn't say it with anger, just clarity. Sometimes the hardest part about starting over is accepting who's no longer part of the future. They made their decision. I made mine. The building is quiet at night. Upstairs, where I live now, the floors creak in familiar places. I hear the hum of the espresso machine below when Frank preps early, and sometimes the scent of cinnamon sneaks up the stairwell. It's not the house I grew up in, but it's a kind of home. And in the back of the closet, tucked behind a box of old ledgers, I found something that reminded me just how far from over my mother's story really was. The apartment above the coffee shop is small, but it's enough. The walls still carry the warmth of old tenants, and the floorboards shift like they remember stories no one's told in years. I kept most things the way they were, but I repainted the kitchen. Light yellow, the color of my mother's favorite sweater. On my second week living here, I found a box in the back of the bedroom closet tucked behind a stack of old ledgers and brittle folders. Inside were hand-drawn sketches in my mother's handwriting. Notes in the margins about community events, shelf layouts, ideas for expanding the shop into a bookstore cafe. She'd written down names of local authors, circled the word gather. It hit me harder than I expected. Not grief exactly, but recognition. She had plans for this place, dreams that never had the chance to live. But I do. Every Sunday morning now I make her pancakes. The same recipe, the same rhythm. I use the old pan she left behind, the one with the worn handle and slight dent along the rim. I open the windows while I cook, let the smell drift into the hallway and down the stairs. Frank says it reminds him of the early days. The neighborhood's changing fast. Developers come by weekly offering numbers I'd never imagined. I don't even entertain the meetings anymore. This place isn't for sale. It isn't just real estate, it's memory, and it's mine. I kept their advice. I started over. I let go of what hurt. But not of her, not of what she built. That's the part they never understood. They erased me to move forward. I remembered her to rebuild. They wanted me gone. I just gave them what they asked for. And in the quiet hours of morning, with the scent of coffee rising from the shop below and the weight of her plans spread across my kitchen table, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.